Welcome back to another edition of This Week NCAA Football, powered by GEICO. Bobby Broyles and Tim McDonald here for the playoff quarterfinals episode. Two CAA football teams remain, Tim, and we'll start today with the recap of the second round. To me, all three league representatives showed how important it is to earn that bye week and get a national seed. The well-rested teams pulled through in all three contests, especially in the second half.
I couldn't have said it better. You know, you underestimate how important it is to play at home. New Hampshire and Villanova did not play their best games of the season in any sense, but they still found a way to win. Richmond, on the other hand, kind of got worn down in the second half. First half was a huge defensive struggle for the Spiders. Ultimately, Coastal Carolina pulled away in that game. Spiders only rushed for 54 yards on 19 attempts, really became one-dimensional. Michael Strauss was knocked around. But again, kudos to the Spiders, their most wins since 2009, which is also the last time they made the playoffs. Yep. Michael Strauss, the quarterback, finishes his career second all-time in touchdowns, second all-time in passing completions. So again, congrats to Danny Rocco and the Spiders. It's a tough way to end the season. Like you said, though, the home teams, UNH, you know, in any sense, it wasn't the prettiest game for them. They had turned the ball over a couple of times, could have put that game away. And in the second half, you know, the run game really shined for them. They did not have a passing touchdown in that game, scored 6 times on the ground and outlasted Fordham, a really good offensive team, and shut them down. And Villanova, what else can you say? You know, they just continue to fight and claw when they need to do it. Down 13-0 in that game, they fight back, okay? Down 22-14 in the fourth quarter, they fight back. John Robertson, a huge drive in that fourth quarter in the rain. A minute 12 left, he scores a touchdown, and they beat Liberty. Again, it does show the importance of how home teams can play in the playoffs and what that means. And it's especially big this week because we, again, have 2 teams in state football remaining, but both of them will play at home.
Indeed, and kind of going on your philosophy, it really showed in the second half. The well-rested team imposed their will, especially on the ground in all 3 of those games.
Very true.
Come away with victories. And then there were 2. Let's jump right ahead to the league's quarterfinal matchup starting Friday night with a nationally televised game on ESPN2 at 8 p.m. This should be a fun atmosphere in Durham as the Wildcats play host to Chattanooga out of the SoCon. Doesn't look like UNH running back Jimmy Owens will be available Friday with the knee injury. How do the Wildcats replace his production, and what do you think their strategy will be offensively versus the Mocs?
Yeah, bright lights in the dungeon on a Friday night. It's a national stage. There's no other football games in America or in the world, maybe not in the world, but in America going on at this moment. A huge opportunity to showcase this program. And again, like you mentioned, Jimmy Owens, he took the first carry that UNH had, the first offensive play, 51 yards to the house, and in the second quarter got a little bit banged up. We think it's a knee injury, but again, New Hampshire, like you said, set the tone last week. They had a bunch of balance, 270 rush yards, 274 pass yards, and again, it still felt like, to me, and maybe you can agree with it, it still felt like they left some points out there to be points on the board. You know, what they did to Michael Niebrick in that Fordham offense was just special. Michael Niebrick only completed 12 passes. Fordham only had 161 passing yards, which is a huge advantage for that UNH defense and just keeps the confidence building. I think the key offensively for UNH, like you said, is going to be continue to have that ground game and continue to have some balance. Nico Storetti had a career-high 4 touchdowns last week. Amazingly, he had 110 rushing yards. He's the only UNH running back this season to go over 100 yards, so that tells you about the balance and how they score offensively for New Hampshire. I'm going to look this week also, besides the ground game, Dalton Crossan, he's going to be asked to have a lot of carries this week. He's pretty much the backup running back. I think they're going to use him in the pass game as well, and Harold Spears, the tight end, is going to have to play huge. Sean Goldrich in this UNH offense, I think everyone will admit they did not play their best game, but they still put up 44 points last week. Friday night versus a Chattanooga team, defensively is very physical. They have a 3-time defensive player of the year in the SoCon and Davis Tall and a defensive lineman. They're going to give them a lot of problems, and Chattanooga is a team that's very, very good against the run. Could cause a lot of issues, but that D-line is tough. I think UNH, playing at home, offensively, they have to get the ground game going.
You just spoke briefly about the Wildcat defense, and they were very impressive last week versus that potent Fordham offense. What specifically are you looking at this week to stop the Mocs and their talented QB?
We should mention Chattanooga UTC has a head coach in Ross Huseman who's been around CAA football. He was the defensive coordinator at Richmond, especially during that run when they went to the championship and won the championship. He was the defensive coordinator, then took over at Chattanooga. You'll probably hear it on ESPN 1,000 times this Friday night, but his son is the starting quarterback. Jacob Huseman is a guy who was the offensive player in the Southern Conference, Offensive Player of the Year. A guy who's really multi-dimensional, has 915 rush yards, 12 touchdowns rushing. Really a dual threat guy. Coach McDonald said he reminded him a lot of Chris Whitney, the Villanova quarterback, a big guy who can run the ball. Chattanooga ranks in the top 5 for FCS time of possession. Last week they held the ball for over 40 minutes and they just really squeezed the life out of Indiana State in a game that they won handily. UNH has to stop this quarterback, Jacob Huseman. It's going to be huge this week. I'm looking at guys like Devon Gillette, Shane McNeely, Casey DeAndrade, a bunch of guys up front. They got 9 sacks last week versus Fordham, which was absolutely huge. When they can pressure the quarterback and they can make teams one-dimensional, it's huge. They're going to have a huge task this week against, like I said, a guy who can run with he can run with his feet, he can beat them with their arm. UTC is a team that was tested out of conference play. They played Jacksonville State. They had 2 FBS games. So this is going to be a great matchup on Friday night of 2 teams that really have different ways of moving the ball on offense. New Hampshire has to stay off the field on defense if they want to win this game.
Friday Night Lights in Durham. It should be a special one on Friday for New Hampshire. On Saturday at 1, though, Villanova takes on Sam Houston State out of the Southland on ESPN3. Some familiar faces in this one, Tim, from the sidelines. But let's look at the offensive matchups first. Turnovers almost doomed Villanova last week, but the running game stepped up when they needed it the most. Do you see a similar approach this Saturday versus the Bearcats?
Yep, familiar faces indeed. Casey Keeler, the former coach at Delaware, comes back. Let's remember, before I get into the offensive ideas for Villanova here, this game, the only reason it's at Villanova was because Sam Houston State went on the road at Jacksonville State last week and beat them, and that was a huge win for them. And they've also beat a really good team in southeastern Louisiana this season at conference foe, so they're battle tested already coming into this game. But Villanova, like you said, last week rushed for over 200 yards versus Liberty and limited the Flames to under 100 yards rushing. That's going to be the key. Sam Houston State's a team out of the Southland, a classic Southland team, a classic Casey Keeler team, really physical up front and a lot of transfers. This is a team with over a dozen transfers, a lot of big bodies. Villanova, I think it's going to be the key. We know Robertson didn't have his best game passing last week, was only 8 of 19, Bob, but he did have 100 yards rushing and 2 touchdowns. We also looked at a guy that I talked about, Kevin Monangai, had 20 rushes, 102 yards, 5.1 yards per carry. This Villanova team, when they can rush and when they can convincingly move the ball on the ground, they're just a dangerous team. Sam Houston State struggles against the pass, but again, you look at that game versus Liberty last week for Villanova. Yes, they struggled and they were at times behind sometimes, but they still stuck to that run game. And I think that shows composure of a good team, and it shows a good team knows what they need to do to win. If Villanova wants to have any success this Saturday versus Sam Houston, they're going to need to find some balance and then run the ball a little bit better this week.
Nova made some nice adjustments at halftime against Liberty, holding the Flames to just 3 second-half points. What will be the keys for the Wildcat defense coming into Saturday?
I think it's going to be a lot like the UNH defense. You have to stop the opposing team's quarterback. Sam Houston State has a really great guy in Jared Johnson. He's a guy who might not light up the scoreboard, only throws 180 yards passing per game, but I keep on talking all season long about how Villanova's defense has just been underrated and undervalued in general. But really, against the run, they've been very sound. Villanova limited Liberty last week to just 63 rushing yards. And Villanova, in the FCS, they're 7th in rush D this year, 103 rushing yards per game. On the other hand, Sam Houston State averages 257 yards per game, so something has to give there. If Villanova can take care of the ball on offense and limit Sam Houston State to slow drives, I think that's going to be key right now. Sam Houston State, like I said, not only physical on defense, but physical on offense. Their run game dictates the offense, and then Jared Johnson can hit you for a couple of throws. Like I said, I don't think Sam Houston State is going to come out here and throw the ball all over the field, but if they have an opportunity to set the tone on the ground, that's where they're going to start. And Villanova defensively, guys like Don Cherry, guys like Pat Williams, those guys are going to have to play huge up front, especially if they want to stop the Sam Houston State team. It's a really interesting matchup. Like I said, Casey Keeler coming back. We know him and Andy Talley had some battles in the Battle of the Blue when he was at Delaware. I'm really interested to see, how that, and I know they're friendly and I know they're coaching buddies. It's just really interesting to think about what the other coach knows about the tendencies of the other. Remember, they haven't coached in about 3 years against each other.
And indeed, I think it's important to note Sam Houston State has played tough games on the road this year at Eastern Washington, at LSU. I mean, they know how to get on the road.
Certainly battle tested so far, so I don't think it's going to be that huge of a factor coming to Villanova. Weather, I think you can just throw that out the window.
Indeed. CAAfootball.com has it all for information regarding the quarterfinals, including links to watch this weekend's matchups online.
Many members from the CA football crew, including myself, will be in attendance at each of the games this weekend, so be sure to find us on social media. You can search CA Football and find us on Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook, and use the CA Football hashtag CAAFB.
Alex Souza has agreed with me much more as of late on the CA Football podcast.
Yes,
and I will
change that.
Hopefully it stays that way. Tomorrow we'll get some insight on this weekend's opponents. We're going to cross the enemy lines and talk to some people from Chattanooga and Sam Houston, as they will be our guests on the show.
Excited for that.
Make sure to catch it all tomorrow on CAA Football's Everyday is Saturday blog, cafootball.wordpress.com.
Well, I like to leave you with some wisdom before you wrap us up here, but
go ahead.
Let's just remember, 2 teams remain right now. Only 8 teams in general in the FCS remain. This is a huge weekend. Some things to look at right now. New Hampshire and Villanova if you can say there's any plain weakness right now, I think we can both agree it's been their kicking game. New Hampshire's 6 of 12 on field goals on the year. Villanova's 4 of 9. Both of the coaches, Andy Talley and Coach McDonald, I really think are not going to leave a game in fate to their kickers. So don't be surprised if it's a 4th and 2 and they go for it inside their own end zone. I think a couple of players also, like Kevin Goulias last week for Villanova, 2 catches, 157 yards. He was their big play guy. And New Hampshire, R.J. Harris, can't forget to mention this, 8 catches away from becoming the all-time CAA football record holder in receptions. Something to watch as well in that game.
Indeed. It should be another exciting weekend here in the league. He's Tim McDonald. I'm Bobby Broyles. You know the deal. We'll see you next week.